Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.
That metaphor of the house that's hundreds of years old, it's not really your house. I think about that theme with music and specifically music that's passed down from generation to generation. These tunes were here before us, they'll be here after us. We're just sort of the temporary vessels for these tunes to pass through. We're little radios with our antenna out, and they just kind of come in, and we put our own creative stamp on them. And I encourage people to embrace the creative impulses in the music and not just approach it as if you're simply replicating as a museum piece.
Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. My guest on the podcast this week is Brad Kolodner. Brad is a fantastic clawhammer banjo player, plays as a solo act, has records out under his own name. He also plays with his father under Ken and Brad Kolodner. The band Charm City Junction, he plays in a duet with George Jackson, lots of different stuff, all of which is fabulous. And we're going to chat about all of that. His route into clawhammer, how he discovered the banjo. A really interesting story. Brad grew up in and around old-time music, but didn't sort of discover it for himself as a player until his teens. And we chat about that. We talk about his work with his dad. We talk about his work with George. But Brad is also very involved in the music scene in Baltimore, where he lives. He's the founder, one of the founders of the Baltimore Old Time Jam and the annual Baltimore Old Time Music Festival. He sits on the IBMA board of directors. He has a couple of radio shows with Bluegrass Country Radio and Radio Bristol. Really sort of varied bunch of stuff that Brad's involved in, and really interesting because we, all of this is grounded in kind of community and people and the social side of all this, and that's all really interesting too. But bottom line is, I just love Brad's music. I love his playing. I was lucky enough to hear him play with George Jackson at IBMA in Chattanooga last year, which was fantastic. And just a really lovely conversation. I really enjoyed this. You're going to hear some examples of Brad's music through this interview. Something from his solo gourd banjo album, something from the band he has with his dad, something from one of his solo records, and something with George Jackson as well. And I'll stick links in the show notes so you can see what all of those tracks were, and where you can go and find them if you're interested in that. And there's also links in there to go and find out more about Brad and what he's up to. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did. Really, really lovely conversation. All the usual stuff. If you want to support Bluegrass Jam Along, you can subscribe through Apple Podcasts, or click the link in the show notes that says support the show. But the main thing is, if you've enjoyed this one, please do share an episode with friends who you think might enjoy it. That's the most important thing. BluegrassJamAlong.com for more info. Come and find me on the socials and get involved with the conversation. But yeah, here comes my interview with Brad. Brad, welcome to Bluegrass Jam Along. It's great to see you.
Hey, Matt. Nice to be with you.
But looking forward to this one. I often won't do the kind of how did you get into music story, and sometimes I do, and it's very much based on the guest. And I'm really interested with this one because there's a kind of a perception in bluegrass old time string band music that some people learn from family, grow up in the music, and some people sort of come to it separately. And you kind of did both, which I find really interesting, and that you grew up around old time music, but it wasn't necessarily something you dived straight into.
It was just part of the soundtrack of my childhood, so when I was falling asleep at night, I can still remember the sounds of my father's hammered dulcimer coming from down in the living room, and I would often have trouble falling asleep when I was a little kid, and I would even bring my pillow and a blanket to the top landing of the stairs and just lay down there with I'd bring my little clock and just whatever made me feel cozy there, and I would just sit closer to the downstairs and listen to the music and fall asleep. And then my mom would kind of tap me on my shoulder and say, okay, you got to go to your room eventually. You can't just sleep at the top of the stairs. But I literally did that a bunch of times. And when I think back, the music that my father plays and continues to play to this day, it's such an eclectic mix. And I think I just was absorbing the sounds of what he was playing and what his band Helicon was playing, and I couldn't avoid it, but I really, I think I enjoyed it. I didn't really try to push back or rebel. My parents didn't encourage me to play folk music or anything like that, but I did eventually find my way to the banjo as a teenager in a different context. It wasn't my father who was showing me the music. It was a completely different setting. And it just connected with me when I was a teen, and then went down the banjo path, and that was now almost 20 years ago, and I'm still loving Clawhammer Banjo.
Well, we'll come to that moment then in a little bit, but what was, because I find this endlessly fascinating. We inherit music from our parents or whoever we're around as kids, but we also usually find our own as well. So if that wasn't your music as a teenager at first, what were you listening to?
Oh, man, I was really into classic rock. I had a buddy, one of my best friends in high school, James. He and I would sit in my living room or sit in my bedroom on weekends and listen to the local classic rock station. And we had this game where we would guess which one of us could guess the artist first, and it was like, oh, Rush, or oh, Yes, or, The Who, or whatever it was, Tom Petty, and we were just listening to classic rock endlessly. My first concert was a Bruce Springsteen show at the arena in D.C., and saw Tom Petty a few times, and Jim Croce, John Denver, really enjoyed listening to them, and it was definitely the music that my parents listened to when they were probably my age at the time, so that really connected with me. But there's a folk side to some of that era of music, the James Taylors, the Joan Baez, Bob Dylan kind of streak to the classic rock world. And that music really connected with me. And I think I made those connections when I heard artists in bluegrass and old time covering some of those songs. Like I remember hearing Seldom Seen covering some James Taylor. I remember hearing there's this banjo player who I learned from, Richie Stearns. He was covering a Johnny Cash song in a concert at a music camp that I was attending, and that was really my aha moment. So it was that link between the classic rock that I was really enjoying and the folk music that I was used to hearing around the house, and making that connection and kind of finding it on my own. And that intrinsically motivated me to then dig deeper into the folk and roots side. I didn't really know the difference between bluegrass or old time or Irish music or any of that kind of those different lanes. But it's that's probably how I kind of connected the dots early on.
And did that kind of aha moment was that then something that went away and you thought about for a while, or was it immediately like, I've heard that, let's have a go at that?
I think it was the connection between hearing the tunes in my head that have just been playing as a soundtrack to my life growing up, and then being able to express them through the banjo specifically, and like feeling. I can still remember holding an open back banjo for the first time, and like the vibration of the instrument as my fingernail hit the string, and it felt really awkward. Clawhammer banjo is such an unusual way of picking the strings. You pick down across the note and your thumb comes up, and it's just a very unusual motion, and somehow it just clicked into place physically. I really enjoyed like the way the instrument felt, and I picked it up quickly, and I think that kind of that instant gratification of learning it at a pretty fast clip in those first couple months of playing, I think that's really what kind of cemented my interest. And then, of course, finding the community within the music and using it as a social tool. I think so many of folks who are listening now who play bluegrass or old time or roots music or just a fan of the music, I'm sure there's a story about the community and how it becomes a social tool and this worldwide network. And once I sort of opened that door, it was just, I was home free.
Yeah, that whole social side of it is such an interesting thing. And one of the kind of the big differences if you've kind of grown up playing like quote unquote rock instruments and being in bands and stuff, it's much more about individuals and little ensembles of people doing things separately. And that idea that you can just turn up and sit in a room and everybody knows these tunes, and you've got a chance of playing along with somebody you've met 10 minutes before is a really powerful thing. And I think that's it's one of the the most glorious things about any kind of social music, but there's something particularly in the string band world that comes through, I think, stronger than anywhere else.
And sometimes you don't even meet the people before you play with them. You just start playing, and then the jam or the tune ends, and then you introduce yourself to one another. You've already established this connection. It's really a beautiful thing in a jam after you've played through a tune and it sounds great and it's grooving, and then you're like, hey, I'm Brad. Nice to meet you. It's just a great way to connect with folks. And I think going to some of those old-time string band festivals early on, and being able to rediscover the music for myself, not just through the lens of my father or through the other musicians in his orbit, being able to make friends who are my age when I went off to college in Ithaca, New York, and connecting with other people who are peers through the music, that was critical. And now I'm happy to play with anybody, but it continues to be a social tool, and I love seeking out new festivals and new gatherings and opportunities to jam with folks. It just never gets old.
It's funny, just you talking about that social aspect of getting to know people. When I interviewed Sarah Watkins from Nickel Creek and I'm with her, she talked specifically about the act of playing cover songs as a way of getting to know people. Do you know this song? Let's sit and play a song together, as like an actual kind of physical way of getting to know a person.
Oh yeah, I feel super grateful to have found this style, and I think on the other side, I was attracted to Clawhammer Banjo because it is an instrument that also lends itself to playing by yourself, and really it's contained as an instrument with rhythm, percussion, melody. I'm happy sitting on my porch playing tunes like I was doing earlier today on this beautiful day here in Baltimore, and heading to a jam later today and being able to play with other folks. So having those dynamic playing opportunities for me, whether it's solo or with just a couple folks, or in the midst of a 40-person jam, there's so many different ways to use that music just to connect with my own self and feel really enriched. And an hour sitting playing the banjo is an hour well spent, whether I'm playing it with other folks or by myself.
That point about the sort of completeness of the clawhammer style particularly is really interesting, because like a bluegrass band, each instrument can sound great on its own, and there are people who made amazing solo guitar records and all of that stuff. But there's something about a bluegrass band where each of the instruments also has a role as a part of the drum kit almost. And clawhammer is kind of that wonderful. I'd never really tried playing it until a year or so ago, and I bought a banjo. And I started out as a drummer and then moved to being a kind of guitarist, and the idea that you could sort of be both at the same time while playing clawhammer was fascinating. It's such a contained little rhythm section in its own right when you hear it played really well.
Yeah, any instrument in the old time string band is a rhythm instrument, whether you're fiddling or playing guitar, banjo, bass. Like, there's such a rhythmic pulse to that, and you can play with, and just like in bluegrass, you can have any real combination of those instruments. I guess like a 5 banjo jam would sound pretty strange, but you can bring all these other instruments kind of together there's great banjo fiddle duos, or banjo guitar, the mandolin guitar. There's so many interesting combinations to be made, I think, because there is such a strong rhythmic component to each of them. And I think the pulse of old time, that shared melody, that groove that you're really trying to maintain, at least with the banjo and the fiddle, locking in together with the melody and complementing each other with that drive of the guitar and the bass. It's just such a classic sound. And what I seek out in the summer at music festivals are those tight jams with that kind of core string band sound. But I've also found a real joy in exploring the some of the outer edges of what's possible with clawhammer banjo. And in fact, playing in a band with my father, Ken, who's a hammered dulcimer player, and exploring that kind of interplay. Also playing in this other band, Charm City Junction, with button accordion and bluegrass fiddle and bass, and trying to find these ways to sort of lock together or bring together these different textures. And it's really amazing how much ground there is still yet to cover in this music in terms of different instrument combinations and textures and layering. And it's really, of course, I love that old school core sound of old time, but it's really exciting to see how the percussive and rhythmic nature of clawhammer can kind of blend in with other sounds.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Is that maybe an area that is, you sort of hinted at it then, but like underexplored? Because one of the joys of listening to string band music is you've got this combination of like double bass and fiddle that have been around for years and years and years, and people have sort of worked out how to play them and all the different things they can do. But listening to like the second half of the last century, and you hear people who will take an instrument like the mandolin or three-finger kind of banjo, or like people like Jerry Douglas with the dobro, and all of those people really taking those things and going, well, where can we go with this? Where else can we do? Maybe clawhammer is an area that is still a bit more ripe for exploration than others.
Oh, absolutely. There are a number of players out there on the scene today who are really pushing the boundaries of the instrument, exploring different feels, different time signatures, different kinds of melodies and scales. And it's exciting. I think it is an underexplored side of the instrument, pushing it into other genres. But there are lots of folks who are using it in Americana music and in roots music as an instrument in a country songwriting context. Clawhammer, I think, is really versatile in that way because it does have kind of this there's basically band in one hand, and you've got, like I said earlier, the rhythm, the melody, the percussion. So it's really nice at accompanying songs. But there's still plenty to be explored. And for me, I think I found the combinations here in Baltimore where I live. The folks I play with they're very much peers. They're folks who I am friends with, and a lot of the music we make is sort of built on that personal connection, the friendship, and the exploring of crossing the genres over, into different, exploring new territory. I feel like that's as much of a product of just who is around me in this local community and who I've kind of sought out as, excellent musicians and great friends as well. So it's not like I sort of set out playing clawhammer to find the peculiar ways to implement this instrument, but it is exciting to find a new texture, a new combo that's really unusual.
And it feels, from things that I've read, and I'm very, very far from being an expert in this, but I get a sense that Baltimore has been a bit of a musical crossroads. Like, it's not kind of surprising you would mention this conglomeration of styles and different influences and things, because it feels like Baltimore's been part of the kind of move from rural areas to more kind of urbanized areas, and stuff's come in from different angles and different sides and different genres, and there's definite kind of melting pot of musical styles in the city from what I see from afar.
And there have been for generations. It's where the North meets the South, right here in the Mid-Atlantic, the port city, and going back many generations, there's history of the banjo. The first banjo factory in the world was here in Baltimore, and there's this combination of traditional Irish music that's really strong here in the city, along with, of course, a bluegrass history, folks from Appalachia moving to the area, industry and finding work, settling down here and outside of Baltimore, and folks coming down from Pennsylvania like the McCurries or the Paisleys, and in Northeast Maryland, folks from the mountains. The Appalachian Mountains are just an hour drive west, and it's this real it's this real meeting point of all these different communities. And it's, from a practical standpoint, it's very affordable for a big city on the East Coast. So there's lots of musicians who can live here and carve out a life for themselves doing music as a profession. And so there is a nice, robust community of professional bluegrass and old time and roots musicians who live in the area. So that helps, prop up the scene. And it's been exciting, especially in the last decade, to really see how the bluegrass and old time scene has kind of gone through this revival.
Yeah, and it sounds like sort of Charm City Junction, your band you were talking about with the button accordion and the kind of the mix of styles, is very much kind of an expression of that.
Yeah, for sure. That's where our name certainly just pinpoints that. Charm City is a nickname for Baltimore, and the Junction being the meeting point of the bluegrass, old time, and Irish communities here. It's a very collaborative scene. It's not segmented into separate. There are of course different shades of the communities, but there's a lot of collaboration. A lot of folks who are excited to support each other in the scenes, and it's not so big of a music community that we can afford to just go off into our own corners. Like, there's a lot of collaboration. And it's, I think, what helps keep the scene really vibrant and healthy.
Yeah, and it feels to me like you are very connected to that community, but also very active in terms of kind of promoting that community and organising within that community and being part of what happens.
Yeah, I feel really fortunate to be one of the kind of the anchors of the old time community here, hosting jams and putting on the local square dance. Co-direct the Baltimore Old Time Music Festival, which has really blossomed into this tremendous celebration of old time music every spring. And I've always enjoyed organizing and bringing people together through the music and sharing the joy that I extract from this music with other people, and providing a space for other artists to play shows. And I'm really interested in highlighting the creative side of the music as well. Of course, I love the social part of the music, but there's a real artistry to this music, and I enjoy hosting jams and these social music opportunities, but I also like to create stages and spaces for people to present their music. I host a house concert series that I've been doing for almost a dozen years now, hosting bands from all across the country that are passing through town. And there's a bunch of activities that I'm involved with organizing, and it's been fun to see other events popping up in town as well. There's a variety of concert series that other folks are organizing, and other festivals, and there's a whole ecosystem now of opportunities to play shows and present this music.
We'll be right back with you just after this. The long-awaited Hill Country series from Collins Guitars represents a new voice in their acoustic lineup. Rooted deep in the bluegrass world, these new Dreadnought NOM models feature a strong fundamental tone with a dry, warm and woody character that's sure to catch the attention of players who hold the vintage instruments of the 30s in their highest regard. Watch world-class pickers Jake Workman, Kenny Smith and Bob Minner perform with new Hill Country instruments on the Collins Guitars YouTube channel, and learn more at collinsguitars.com. And Baltimore plays kind of a big role in your musical life. But you sort of got your grounding playing some of this music elsewhere, didn't you, when you were studying? I'd be really interested to hear what some of those early experiences of starting to find this social music were like for you.
Yeah, I think, well, I went to college in Ithaca, New York to study broadcasting, and I continued to broadcast and host radio shows for bluegrass and old-time music, and I was thinking of going down that path as a journalist or a broadcaster as my full-time career, and then in college, I met some other musicians who play old time and bluegrass music, and we started getting together to play some tunes and just socially. We played a couple gigs. When I would come home in the summer, I'd start playing with my dad, and he would certainly introduce me to other musicians in the area. And I think it was going to Clifftop, the old time string band festival, the Appalachian String Band Festival down in Clifftop, West Virginia. I went there by myself and met so many other musicians who were around my age those first couple of years, and that was really those experiences, jamming late in the night, wandering around with my banjo, finding people to play with, while an intimidating experience on one hand, also exhilarating when you get into a jam that's just like all the pieces are there, and you've got these new friends, and as we were discussing earlier, the social side of the music. I think those early experiences, just finding those pop-up jam sessions, that was really the aha moment for me. And then also playing shows with my dad. I mean, that was really big. We recorded an album back in 2011, and we're getting ready to release a new record this year. And we're actually re-recording some of the tunes that we played on that first album, which feels like so long ago now. And we still play a couple of those tunes that we recorded 15 years ago, and they've changed so much. But being able to play shows and having those experiences on stage as well, I've always enjoyed, being behind a microphone or, being in that setting and storytelling and, facilitating the fun and the enjoyment of an audience. I really appreciate that role. And, so I think the combination of the performing and the social jamming and just feeling sort of, I don't know what else I would do with my life at this point if it weren't, music.
Well, and it's really interesting, that kind of distinction, is because it's very common in kind of roots music, particularly social music like old time and bluegrass, for you to be playing kind of multi-generationally, and it's a great way of like generations interacting together in a way that doesn't necessarily happen in other ways. But it's also a recurring theme that people have talked about on the podcast, but also just hearing people in other interviews and things I've read. So many people who've come up kind of playing as younger people, it's the moment they find some people their own age to play with that it becomes kind of I want to find my people of the same generation to play with. And there's often a really defining moment around that, just as you were saying there, because it becomes a separate thing almost from the...
Yeah, and to take it a step further, I feel like the best music I make, or the most enjoyment I get from music making, tends to be with folks that I'm also compatible with socially, or there's some kind of interpersonal chemistry as friends. Not to say that, it's not possible with folks I don't really connect with, although I like to think that I can connect with most people. But, there's definitely spaces where if there's a great social connection, a nice musical connection can also, there's the groundwork for that. Certainly those early days playing with folks who are peers, but I've grown to really appreciate and seek out those intergenerational opportunities. It's really special to think of the folks who I'm playing with who are 20, 30, 40 years older. They're friends. They're of another generation, but they're also we're friends, and we get to play music together.
Well, and I wonder whether what it really boils down to is that the things that make you socially compatible are often the things that make people musically compatible, because to create that kind of social connection relies on you being willing to put yourself out there and express something of you, but also to listen to other people and hear who they are and for them to feel heard as well. And that's exactly what you do when you sit down and play music well with people, isn't it?
And I think that keyword "listen" is the one that really hits for me. It's when I'm playing with other musicians that are really listening to who they're playing with and responding and interacting with them. Those are some of my favorite moments in a musical relationship are those nonverbal communications that there's that little eye contact or that acknowledgement of, oh yeah, I heard that little variation you did, or oh, I noticed that little, call and response thing you just, pulled off. Those are my favorite moments in any jam session. I think if everyone's got their head down and you're just kind of in your own silo, it can be fun for a little while, but at a certain point you look around, you're like, is anyone actually listening to each other? And that's, that can get a little tiring. That said, it is fun to be in a big jam with like 20 or 30 people that's just grooving all together. You aren't listening to any one individual player, but you're just listening to the sum of all the parts. And that can be great too, but certainly in a more intimate context, with just a couple other musicians, being able to listen to each other is critical.
Yeah, it's one of the things that one of those themes that's come out of doing sort of a few years of these interviews now, of just how much musicians talk about listening. And you think about, it's about what you play and it's about the noise you make and the notes you choose, but so the theme just comes back again. My favourite kind of example of it was one I talked to Marcel Ardans from the Lessons with Marcel YouTube channel, and he was talking about a clip of Tony Rice at a festival, and somebody was saying, Tony, can you demonstrate a little bit of your rhythm guitar technique for us, because you've got a really cool rhythm technique? And he went, I can't really do it because there's nobody here. I can't show it to you on its own because it doesn't really exist on its own. And I thought that was a kind of really beautiful summing up of that in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I play solo occasionally in concerts, but it's such a different animal. I don't feel like I'm tapping into my full expressiveness unless I'm playing in with other musicians. That conversation, that interplay is really what gets to a deeper place. And I think, when I was saying earlier about Clawhammer Banjo can certainly work great as a solo instrument, but I'm really interested in exploring some of the textures that are great for accompaniment and, backup and supporting each other. And you mentioned Tony Rice, of course, who's a legend for his lead playing, but, most musicians who really played with him know that it's his backup and accompaniment that's really where the magic is. And I think, any musician that has, been in a band for years where there's that great interplay knows that it's the support role that you play for each other that really is what sustains that relationship.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I first came across your music when your record Chimney Swifts came out, which has quite a few duets on it. And subsequently I've heard you play with George Jackson as a duet, and I saw you guys play at IBMA last year, but also I've been listening a lot to Old Growth, your gourd banjo solo record, and mixed in with some of the Charm City Junction stuff, there's a real mix of context there and things you're able to do in those contexts. And it's fascinating hearing the instrument in those places with different people as well, different duets on Chimney Swifts, and it's the kind of variety of context brings something out each time, doesn't it?
Well, thanks for listening so much to the music I make. I really appreciate that. It's a joy to know that there's folks out there who are listening to the variety of music that I've recorded over the past few years, because I definitely embrace that variety in my life and in my musical life, playing with multiple different bands, in the course of a year. It's very satisfying. But I think with the solo playing, I've found that Clawhammer Banjo can, in the context of a band, sometimes it can get a little buried, and I think I appreciate the opportunity to, highlight the solo voice of the instrument as well, and doing that solo gourd banjo album, Old Growth, is a project I've been wanting to do for many years, and the timing worked out in the winter of 2024 to really just go for it, booking a few days in the studio and just play a bunch of the tunes that I enjoy on the fretless gourd banjo and highlighting that voice. I've always been interested in highlighting specifically Clawhammer Banjo as a melodic voice and not just an accompaniment. So presenting it as a melody instrument as well. And I think there's still more projects to produce and make, and I'm excited about this new record with my father and other future solo albums or collaborative records. It's definitely been a fun few years having a handful of different projects, all highlighting different elements of the banjo. Well,
it's interesting because with a lot of musicians, most people who play in kind of the old-time bluegrass string band world play in various versions of themselves. It's very rare that people just do one thing and that's it. But often there's one of those things you associate them more with than the others. And I don't get that sense from you. I get the sense of your solo records being a thing. You're kind of particularly seeing some of the stuff on social media recently. The duet with your dad is, at the moment is a real thing. But, stuff that you've done with George and with the band, and it doesn't feel like you do one thing and occasionally do other things. It feels like you are constantly doing a range of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there's a fulfilling musical, creative element to that. There's also just like the practical. I'd love to have more gigs this year, so I'm not available with that band, but that band is available for this weekend, so let's get that configuration together. But like in all seriousness, I think that variety is what keeps it fresh for me. I've never really wanted to have one band or one project that I kind of put all my eggs into that basket. I love the variety throughout the year, whether it's, as a performer, recording music, organizing events. I really enjoy that, being able to kind of dip into all these different roles as an organizer, as a musician, as a member of a band, as a solo performer. That all keeps it very, very fresh for me. And I think I'm inspired by other musicians in my immediate orbit. We all kind of egg each other on in terms of, when I see my other friends and other folks in the community recording new music and continuing to, explore new creative directions, that inspires me as well. And I'm regularly going to concerts and going to festivals and music conferences and kind of feeding my creative soul as well, and trying to carve out time to fulfill my own musical cup, not just playing gigs or, seeking out opportunities to perform, but seeking out opportunities to put myself in a place where I'm going to feel musically inspired and continuing to learn new music and write new tunes.
And it seems like kind of collaboration and the social side of things goes well beyond the musical side of things, because we talked about all the stuff that you're involved in Baltimore, but also you have a couple of radio shows and kind of getting the music out to people and sort of helping curate the vast mass of music we have these days so people can meaningfully find things. But you're also heavily involved with the IBMA, and it feels like that kind of organising and socialising and just being part of the structure of how this stuff happens is important to you as well.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, creating opportunities for other artists, and I want to see a thriving ecosystem for roots musicians, bluegrass, old time. There's so many great artists out there, and folks who listen to your podcast know there are so many bands and artists that deserve to have a larger platform for their music and more ears on what they're doing. It's just incredible music that's being made, and if you have a chance to amplify those stories, those songs, those artists, that's what I do through my radio shows. Certainly the work with IBMA is that's, I think, a product of wearing a bunch of different hats and feeling like I've got perspective in a variety of different areas of the music industry. And I feel, called to serve in that way, to kind of make those connections and link the different elements of my experiences over the years. And give back also to an organization that has really supported me. When I was first starting, Charm City Junction we went down there when the conference was in Raleigh back in 2014, or maybe it was 2015, and we showcased, and that really launched us, and we got a whole bunch of great connections and new friends. And ever since then, I've really enjoyed being in that setting at the conference and throughout the year, now serving on the board, being able to connect with other folks who work behind the scenes. I feel very privileged as an artist to be able to go out on stages and play music, but I also have a tremendous respect for those who work kind of more in the shadows behind the artists, organizing festivals, hosting radio shows, doing podcasts, doing all the nitty-gritty work behind the scenes that really supports the whole industry. And I would love to find ways to support the work they're doing. And it's also very rewarding for me to go to these conferences and music, these gatherings where I can be among peers who have this very strange lifestyle of working in the music industry, cobbling together all these different projects, and it's, there aren't that many people out there who make their living and carve out a career for themselves in bluegrass and roots music. So it's sort of affirming to go to these events and be amongst peers in these very specific spaces, and then of course the worldwide community that comes with that. It's remarkable how many folks travel so far to be at these conferences because they have a shared interest in this music and seeing it thrive.
Yeah, and it was at IBMA in Chattanooga last year that I got to hear you play your gourd banjo, and I'd love to hear sort of how that particular instrument came to you, how long you've been playing it for, because it's such a, and this, I heard you playing quite a big room, and then just the sound of that instrument coming back off the walls was quite something.
It was like an airplane hangar in there. I remember playing there's a tune that George and I recorded on our record Shady Lane called Wandering Boy. I think that was the tune that we played in that space. And I just remember the natural reverb in there was pretty wild. It just kept ringing and ringing. The gourd banjo is literally made out of a gourd, so it has this hollow, warm, earthy tone. It's played like a regular banjo in that I'm playing the clawhammer style. It has nylon strings and it's fretless, so it has quite a different sonic quality. But I heard the gourd banjo. I think I actually played the gourd banjo before I really knew what it was or knew what it sounded like. So it was up hanging on a wall at a music store in Ithaca Guitar Works downtown, right next to the famous Moosewood Cafe. And I was there one afternoon, just probably poking around through their banjo collection, and saw this gourd banjo hanging up on the wall, and I didn't actually really know what it was. I just noticed that it was made all out of wood, and then the body was like this round ball plant-looking thing, and picked it up, played it, and it just had this really warm, earthy tone. And I don't know if I bought it on the spot, but I definitely within the week came back and purchased the banjo and started playing it a bunch, and discovered this record by Adam Hurt, great Clawhammer banjo player, recorded an album called Earth Tones, which is just solo gourd banjo. It's one of the most meditative, pleasant listens out there in old-time music. And that was kind of the inspiration behind the record Old Growth, solo gourd banjo, really just focusing on the warm, sustained tones of the gourd banjo. And, of course, the gourd banjo also an excellent prism into the history of the music, the complex stories and timeline of the banjo and how it's come to be. And the gourd is it's always a great conversation starter, but it's, I think for me more than anything, it's such a nice warm contrast to the bright brassy sound of the steel string banjo. So there's a refreshing quality to it.
I think that Adam Hurt record was that particular record was the first time I'd heard a fretless gourd banjo, and just somebody said, "Oh, if you're interested in clawhammer, listen to this," and was totally unprepared for the sound that was about to hit my ears. It's just such a extraordinary thing, and sort of one of the most prominent makers of gourd banjos in America at the moment is based in Baltimore, is he not? Pete Ross works out of Baltimore.
Pete Ross, yeah, he's a neighbor. He lives just about a mile away, right near where I grew up. Near my folks' house, and he's got a shop in his basement where he builds some of the most beautiful gourd banjos, and some of the most prominent, banjo players in the country have his instruments. And I feel very lucky to live in the same town as such a renowned builder, and frankly, a historian, and someone who I can always reach out to if I have a question about banjo history, contextualizing the music. And his partner Christina, who I know has been on your podcast, is also such a wonderful resource for the banjo community.
And did the gourd banjo sort of open up that whole kind of exploration of the history in more detail, or was that something you were already interested in at that point?
I think I was already interested, given the nature of old time music. There's often there's an interest in where the tunes come from and the lineage and the stories, how the tunes have been passed down. So I think I was already somewhat interested in the history of the music and where these tunes are sourced. Although I will say I'm not one of those musicians that in old time music that knows the source for every tune, what fiddler in what county of Appalachia or rural America, first recorded the tune. I don't claim to be an historian of old time tunes or banjo music. I often reference folks who have written about this subject on a much more scholarly level, but I do feel a sense of responsibility as a performer and a community leader to at least be able to open up the conversation and think, direct people towards those sources that can provide a more complete picture, and then also produce events that, like the Old Time Festival that we run with my father and I produce here in Baltimore with this great organization called the Center for Cultural Vibrancy, and we co-produce this event and we curate, panels and workshops and all these sessions to provide a platform for artists and folks who know a lot more about this music than I do to talk about the history and contextualizing it, and I really enjoy providing those platforms for others to tell the stories about the history of the music.
It's interesting with a kind of a historic music, with that sense of like tradition versus progression, and like you go back far enough and the stuff we now think of as tradition was progressive at the time, and there's so many interesting ways people approach it, and some people want to kind of pin it on a board like a butterfly and keep it the same, and some people want to develop it and make it a continuous living, breathing thing. I have a friend who lives in a house that's nearly 400 years old, and he always talks about it as if it's not really my house, I'm just looking after it for a while till somebody else lives in it, and he feels it's his responsibility to understand the history of it a little bit, but doesn't need to be an expert, but to understand it, but also to understand how like it can be lived in now, so it's an actual home still. It's not just this museum piece, and I find that fascinating. And the way people approach music often has a parallel with that in some ways. It's this idea of holding a tradition and giving it some respect, but also keeping it alive and seeing where else it can go and how you can hand it on to the next generation.
That metaphor of the house that's hundreds of years old, it's not really your house. I think about that theme with music and specifically music that's passed down from generation to generation. These tunes were here before us, they'll be here after us. We're just sort of the temporary vessels for these tunes to pass through. We're little radios with our antenna out, and they just kind of come in, and we put our own creative stamp on them. And I encourage people to embrace the creative impulses in the music and not just approach it as if you're simply replicating as a museum piece. While that is certainly something that there's a space for that in this music and representing the way it maybe sounded years ago, but I'm particularly inspired by the push towards letting your own creative influences come through the tunes, and then you pass them back out in whether it's in a jam session or whether it's directly to another person or through your through a recording or somewhere online. It's amazing now the access we have through the internet to like listen to just this massive catalog of music. But I think that process of the tunes passing through us is very much I think what keeps the music feel, on one hand, ephemeral, playing this music and you just play through a tune and it's gone, but it really, as long as somebody else hears it, it's going to keep living on.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it? Because that whole kind of a whole part of what distinguishes folk music and I mean that in the kind of the wider social sense of folk music rather than as a specific genre, but just like this idea of an oral tradition. And looking back to whatever the original version of things is sort of impossible anyway, because all you've got is the point somebody chose to write it down or record it, and those tunes mutated before that and have continued to do so. And the oral tradition now also encompasses hearing somebody play something on YouTube or hearing a record, or like there's so many other versions you can amalgamate into how you hear the music, and it's just such a fascinating endless churn of innovation and kind of holding something safe without cosseting it in a way.
Especially if it's not written down, I don't know how to read music, and lots of folks who play old time and bluegrass, there's written music is a relatively modern, component of this. And I'd say even if you've written a tune, I think anybody who's listening who writes music will know that the process of writing a melody is, there's a process to it. It's not like the tune just kind of appears in your head. You workshop it, you experiment, you explore different ideas, and then when you record it, if you do record it, maybe it's on a voice memo, that's probably different than how it is when you play it in studio, and then it's probably different when you actually play it in concert, much less playing it in the concerts for 15, 20, 30 years. The tune's going to continually evolve, and then it goes into other people's hands, and it's been very exciting to me over the years. I've had a couple of tunes that other folks have recorded, and it's really exciting to hear when another banjo player or another musician picks up the version that I've learned, and I hear their sort of interpretation of it, and I love that process. And teaching and the educational side of the music is very important to me as well, teaching privately in workshops and all of that, but really providing that, unlocking some of those doors for people to continue growing on their instrument and allowing more expressiveness in the way they're interpreting these melodies.
Well, it was interesting hearing what you were saying earlier about the new record that you've got coming up with your dad later this year, because some of those are tunes you've recorded before and are choosing to come back to and record again. It's not a case of like, we haven't got any more tunes, let's do those again. It's
there's a little bit of that too. Yeah.
But it must be a fascinating thing to come back to that, particularly as you talked so eloquently about the kind of crossover of a social relationship and a musical relationship with somebody, to come back years later and see how the tunes have changed, because obviously, and particularly as father and son, your relationship changes as you get older. You appreciate what your parents have been through more than you do when you're younger, and so all of that dynamic sort of coming back to that music again and seeing where that takes you.
I think early on it was very much a relationship built on father and son, with the father being sort of the one who's very much guiding me through those early stages of doing music as a performer, as someone who's writing material, recording, kind of getting my feet under me. And then over the years, we've very much established this partnership, this peer relationship with the music. And I think that's expressed in our music now, as it's very much shared, the creative side of the music. And I do a lot of the talking on stage, probably not surprising as the radio host, but I'd say creatively it's very shared, and there's I think incorporating the other musicians who we've played with for the past decade or so, Alex Laclement on upright bass and Rachel Eddy on guitar and fiddle, playing in the quartet primarily when we play at festivals or when we're hosting our old time festival. That's the primary configuration these days, is the quartet. And in those early days, it was just the duo. So part of this inspiration behind the new record that's coming out later this year is showcasing the full quartet, as we've done for our past couple records. This will be our 5th album as a father-son team, but having those other voices now integrated into the sound that was originally just the duo. I think that's also part of the inspiration behind unearthing some of these old tunes that we keep playing. Like, we honestly play, I'm thinking of a couple of tunes that we're releasing, re-recorded. We play them pretty much every concert, so they've changed. Like I was saying earlier, these tunes are always evolving, and you'll hear artists, often will come back to music that they recorded years ago, and they're just continually evolving.
Well, I very much look forward to hearing the record when it comes out. And I've really enjoyed chatting to you. It's been fantastic. Thanks, Brad.
Hey, thanks, Matt, and thanks for all the work you do amplifying so many voices across bluegrass and roots music. So keep it up.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.